Well, welcome to session 2. And the topic for this session is the state origins of the Bill of Rights. In our last session, we did the English and colonial origins of the Bill of Rights. And in this session, we will do the attempt by the now states, the former colonies, the now states that are independent from Britain. What did they do with regard to the contribution to the Bill of Rights? And what I would like to focus our attention on, can everybody see that at the back there? Do we need to highlight this more, or can you read it? Everybody's all right? Mm-hmm. All right, good, fine. Excuse me, content of the Bill of Rights in the first column. Once again, the 26 rights that are in the Bill of Rights are listed there. In the second is Virginia, then go New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, all the way through, and actually beyond the 13 states to include the Declaration of Independence and up to the Northwest Ordinance. So chronologically, we're moving now from 1776 to 1787, and conceptually, we're moving from colonial and English times to state times and something called a New America with the Northwest Ordinance. And one of the features of the Northwest Ordinance that I like, and we will have a chance to talk about this, is that it explicitly, very early on, declares an end to primogeniture. So that if we start our story with the Magna Carta and primogeniture, we end this phase at the end of session 2 with a clear statement that primogeniture is out in the new America. That primo, first genitor, born. To the firstborn, usually male-born. And but yes, male-born, not just usually, it is. And so the Northwest Ordinance is actually laying out a map for what is going to happen in Ohio and Illinois, the new territory. This is before the Louisiana Purchase, before Florida, and I think it's indicative, illustrative of the sort of the arrival of, for me anyway, an American. And it's been a sort of a journey, and we'll follow that journey. But first of all, I would like us to take a look at the state constitutions and with regard to the Bill of Rights. Now, one of the things that the Second Continental Congress did, besides declare independence, the question, of course, is declaring independence from what or who? But in addition to declaring independence, say, from Britain, the Continental Congress issued a resolve, sent to the former colonies, now to become states, prepare thyself for statehood. And so these 13 states, these 13 colonies, now states in effect, interesting how they became states and whether the revolutionary principle or constitutional principle involved in this transformation, that they, each one of them, with the exception of Rhode Island and Connecticut, so that means 11, met in assembly. And it was not, you see, this is rather from the colonial past, to be sure, but still in a revolutionary way. Never before in the history of the world have a bunch of people sat down and deliberated on reflection, on choice, and chosen a form of government under which they're going to live. The colonial charters involved some of that. But there was always the king's veto, somebody involved in the granting of the land, There were the Maryland grant, there was this grant, that grant. But here, it just somehow went from a colony to a state, and that was it. And these 11 of them sat down and created something called a republic. So the Americans in this period were not just trying to create a form of government where the monarch would become reasonable. That is, the only reasonable monarch is no monarch at all. That is a republic. Now becomes the debate. I mean, what is a republic? It's certainly not the People's Republic of Rhode Island or something like that, but it's the idea. It is not a monarchy. That is for sure. Which means, in other words, that some kind of election is going to take place, because the key to monarchy is that you don't have an election. The line of succession is from father to son, or if perchance by daughter. And then what happens if the Queen Elizabeth dies without child, and then you have to go wander someplace in Scotland to find somebody. And then if Queen Anne dies without child, what do? You have to roam the Black Forest of Germany for somebody who doesn't even speak English. It's so obvious in monarchies. I mean, it's so clear who should be the monarch, right? But so these states decided that they're going to be a republic, which means no monarchy. It also means, in a very, very important way, that this is going to be a republic in which religious liberty is going to play a part. And so what you start to see is the moving away from rather strict colonial charters dealing with religion. I know I said last time that there was certain sort of conscience and liberty there. Yes, compared to the old world. But what we're beginning to see now is an even greater movement towards more and more religious liberty. And by the time you get to the Constitutional Convention, then you have not just simply religious toleration. What you have is religious freedom. I'll make a distinction between religious toleration and religious freedom later on. All right, so you've got a republic. A republic within the American context deals with rights. That the purpose of government, or certainly the purpose of a republic, is to secure rights. Okay, what kind of rights are we going to try to secure? If we were to go choose Virginia, Virginia is really a fascinating place to take a look, and not only because you have Madison there and George Mason there, but Virginia actually declares rights. It doesn't call itself a Bill of Rights. It's a Declaration of Rights, although you will read the Virginia Bill of Rights, right, last session. You will see that the Virginia Declaration of Rights occurs on June the 12th. The Virginia Constitution is on June the 29th. Now, the reason I like this is not only because it's first and before the Declaration of Independence. That is, Virginia declared independence before America did. But that's just an oddity to make you smile. This is the real reason. That is, it clearly outlines that the purpose of a Declaration of Rights is distinct from the purpose of a Constitution. And you can see it clearly because there's two separate documents emerging at two different times, so that it really keeps it clean and clear. Whereas with the other documents, sometimes they're done on the same day and then linked together so that conceptually it tends to be muddled. But this one's clear. What is the point of a Declaration of Rights? It is to declare up front, in a prefatory manner, who we are and what the purpose of government is, what legitimate government is supposed to be, how you change government. And it is like a mission statement, as we said. So, for example, one, that all men are by nature equally free and independent. That's almost like saying we can start from scratch with a state of nature, John Locke. But we know we can't because we've had an English and colonial past. But at the same time, we're going to pretend, we're going to say that certain rights are inherent, not just inherited, so that they go on and say that they are a state of society, they cannot by any compact deprive or divest their posterity, etc., that all power is vested in and consequently derived from the people, which means it's not derived from a monarch. That that government is or ought to be instituted for the common better, etc. That no matter what are entitled to exclusive or separate emoluments. That means that aristocracy is out. All power of suspending laws, blah, 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 all capital and criminal procedure. And it goes on. So that what is happening in Virginia is a well thought out understanding of rights that I'm going to suggest go beyond the English and colonial heritage. Now, where they came from, it's almost like overnight, or between 1763 and 1776, this sense of the French War, the emerging of something called an American, talking about what rights are in danger, so that if we were to go back, Lisa, to I think, by the way, chapter 2 there is the Constitution. It follows completely. So the purpose of the Constitution is to secure rights. What rights are supposed to be secure? These. If you go back now and you scroll down, you can see that 17 out of the 26 rights in the U.S. Bill of Rights come right out of Virginia. Or you can see that, it seems to me that goes beyond the English and colonial heritage. And if you take a look at what those rights are, and you scroll up, you will see that, for example, right of conscience is there. The right of conscience was beginning to emerge in colonial times. But the right of conscience becomes an extremely important revolutionary contribution by these state governments, and we're just using Virginia at the moment as an example, as an expression of this. If you go down, you will see freedom of petition. That's there. Freedom of petition is there, but that was always there in the English and colonial times. What is new is the moving beyond petition, that is, to revolution. What happens if no one listens to your petition? In English and colonial times, tough. You put up with it. What's different is we don't have to put up with it. Of course, for a long train of abuses, we do something. If the difficulties are light and transient, and they can be settled by going to a counselor, then we should do that. And under no circumstance would we call for a no-fault divorce. This is not to remake ourselves, right? This is not California. This is fault divorce. That King George did. List them. Come, bring that list out. So that it's fault divorce. And it means separation. So separation is different than petition. So you're starting to move beyond, we are part of the same family, to, I can't stand you. I'm going to create a new family. Okay, due process of law is in there. But what is, if we move up again, what is different is freedom of speech in the press, the notion of the right of conscience. That is starting to enter into the picture. To put it differently, Englishmen did not have the right of conscience. There was an established church. If you didn't like it, then you went to the Americas. So there was no right to conscience. So where does the right to conscience come from? It's not an inherited right. It has to be an inherent right. It's a right you acquire by nature of what it means to be human, rather than a right you acquire through custom, tradition, common law. So the right to conscience is not a common law right. A common law right is a right where you really can't tell where it came from. You don't know where it ended, where it ends. It's been here. And that, I think, is an important contribution now that you're going to get to the story of rights, these inherent rights. You see it in the Declaration of Independence. You see it in these state constitutions. If we were to go to Pennsylvania, then you see Pennsylvania Declaration of Rights and Constitution. It so turns out that they're linked together. They've got a preamble. They've got the it's also called Declaration of Rights. It's sometimes now called a Bill of Rights. But here's the Declaration of Rights, and you have it, and it goes down, and it's got very much the same thing. But let me just stop. Let's stop at number 13. And you will notice at number 13 that the people have a right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state. And as standing armies in the time of peace are dangerous to liberty, they ought not to be kept up. And the military should be kept under strict subordination to and governed by the civil power. No mention about Protestants having the right to bear arms. Okay? We are beyond the notion that we're concerned about whether the government, at least at this level, is going to be certainly not Catholic. I mean, it's unlikely, except in Maryland. But what has happened as that right has moved across the pond, it has become sort of disassociated from religion and more attached to what is just said. You will also notice in Pennsylvania that the people, you got it, the one about hunting? Yes. That the inhabitants of this state shall have liberty to fowl and hunt in season, in seasonable times on the lands they hold and all other lands therein, and in the manner to fish in all troubled waters, etc. This is the first and only time I've been able to discover that there is a right to hunt and fish with the right to keep and bear arms. Every other one has got to do with some idea of a militia or the defending oneself as a people against autocratic government. The autocratic government is no longer going to be Catholic. The autocratic government is going to be even elected officials gonna awry. And this is the part of the problem of this republic, this teaching of republic. No longer do you have aristocracy and monarchy. You have elections. But can you actually trust elections to completely do the job? And the answer is no. Why? One of the key teachings, I think, of this period is what Lord Acton was to later say, that power corrupts and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. And you mean even those people whom we elect? The answer is yes. That's a huge breakthrough, because the argument up till that time was give us representation as a way of checking the abuse. Once we have representation, then we are checking the abuse. But what if we have representation? Is it possible that our own representatives can abuse the power that we give them? Remember, they don't get the power unless we give it to them. And so power and rights seem to be the head and tail of a coin. So as you give power, somehow rights are given up. And as you retain rights, power is restrained. I think that's where the idea of a Bill of Rights comes in, that kind of power and rights. But we're not working, we haven't clearly worked this one through, because we're still talking about Declaration of Rights at the same time. So you've got Declaration of Rights as a mission statement which precedes the document that the Constitution is supposed to, and yet we're talking about power and rights at the same time. Okay. if we go back to the table, and we just stick with these state constitutions and state declarations of Bill of Rights. The second point, I've hinted at it, but I want to make it very clear right now, is that 7 out of the 11, forget Rhode Island and Connecticut, they just redid their colonial charters, which they thought were fine. That what these 7 out of the 11 had a prefatory Bill of Rights, okay? That is, where would I find a declaration or a Bill of Rights? That would be at the beginning, prior to the nature of the government, and the nature of the government was supposed to secure these rights. 4 of the other states put rights inside of the document. And if we just take a look at one of those 4 states, New York, for example, you can see that New York, the Constitution of New York doesn't start with a declaration of Bill of Rights. It starts with the Constitution. But then it goes on, and pretty quickly, it cites the entire Declaration of Independence in the middle of its document. So that there are 2 ways in which a declaration, Bill of Rights, appear in these revolutionary documents. At the beginning, as a preface, or 2 in the document Constitution itself. I would like to think that as a preface, it's called a declaration, and in the document, it's called a bill, but life isn't that neat and tidy. But I think it is probably helpful, I hope it's helpful, to see that distinction, because a declaration is an announcement, whereas a bill is a listing. Okay, that's the second big point that I want to make. If we were to take a look down the line, you will see no excessive bail, no cruel, unusual punishment. Those come clearly out of the English and colonial tradition. They don't come out of the state revolutionary tradition. All right, let's move to the Declaration of Independence and the Northwest Ordinance. And there's something in these documents that is both attractive and something in these documents that is troublesome for a discussion of rights. What is attractive is that the rights are to be secured in 2 ways. One, by this listing, and secondly, by a certain form of government. That is, we're going to have frequent elections, so that most of these states and most of these, as we start to adopt, they have where annual elections end, tyranny begins. I mean, that's they have recall, they have rotation, they have the governors are not elected directly by the people, except in Massachusetts. They're elected by the legislative branch. The legislative branch dominates, the one that's closest to the people. So they continue, in a certain sense, this concern with the executive branch, except that the governor replaces the king. And so the way in which you control the governor is by making the governor weak and not independent. Now, do you lose something by doing so? The answer is yes. So what is attractive is that there is, in addition to the listing of rights, you have constitutionalism starting to take place in a much more elegant fashion. It's clearly stating separation of powers now. You know, checks and balances are in there. The right to vote is starting to be mentioned. So there's something more and more attractive about the idea of constitutionalism. What is potentially disturbing in both the Declaration of Independence and the Northwest Ordinance is slavery. And in the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson's draft had a condemnation of slavery. and it was removed at the request of South Carolina and Georgia. And the request was, why do you need to do that? Aren't we supposed to be united here? Are we fighting slavery, or are we being independent from the British? And Jefferson thought that, well, he hadn't lost anything by dropping the paragraphs dealing with slavery condemnation, because the condemnation of slavery is contained within the phrase, all men are created equal. Now, what the heck does that phrase mean? He called it a self-evident truth. And one of the greatest difficulties, this is what I'm mentioning, the greatest difficulties for us today is to figure out what a self-evident truth is. What seemed to be so self-evident to people, enlightened people, in the age of enlightenment in the 18th century, seems to be so difficult for us to grasp. Couldn't they see? I mean, what were they talking about? And part of what a self-evident truth is, it requires us to think geometrically. There's historical proof and there's geometrical proof. Historical proof is show me. Geometrical proof is the three angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees. There never was a triangle in the history of the world. So I don't have to show you a triangle. It's just the very concept of a triangle in and of itself. The evidence for the truthfulness of the angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees are contained within the very definition of a triangle itself. Now, that requires a certain kind of abstract thinking that the age of enlightenment produced, like state of nature, the idea that we were born with natural rights, that the purpose of government is to secure these rights. A legitimate government is based on the consent of the governed. I mean, where did all those ideas and concepts come from? I mean, if you turn to history, that's a lie. Governments weren't based on that. I mean, certainly not the British, certainly not the history of the world. It was certainly not based on all of that. Most governments came into existence by accident and force, not by reflection and choice. So that to claim that governments come into being by reflection and choice is to be anti-historical about it. So what can you mean? Well, you're maybe being anti-historical, but you're being pro-philosophical. And pro-philosophical means that you're creating an idea. Now, the difficulty is that's not easy to grasp, particularly in the 20th and 21st century, when the whole doctrine of natural right and the states of nature and inherent rights have fallen by the wayside, and we've been replaced by the idea of evolution and historical understandings. And once you start moving into historical understandings, these abstractions seem to be not only violating historical accuracy, but violating historical reasoning itself. I know this is a long way of going into things, but part of the revolutionary and state-based contribution and the Northwest Ordinance contribution to the Bill of Rights is this natural rights. And if natural rights doesn't make sense, then how can we claim that some of these rights that go beyond the English and the colonial heritage make sense? That's what's difficult about it. What's good about it is that we don't have to rely on government for these rights. We don't have to rely on custom for these rights. These rights are inherent. I mean, I have a number of Chinese students, and I asked the Chinese, where they said, so where do rights come from? And they say, from the government. And they don't have a problem with that. And they know it. But Americans seem to have difficulty. They don't want to believe that rights come from government. They want to believe that rights come from somewhere else. God. Nature's God. But if God is out of favor, then goes that support. All right. Now, what has this got to do with slavery? And the answer is that if you're going to end primogeniture in the economic realm, and you're going to end monarchy in the political realm, and you're going to end the established church in the religious realm, you're establishing freedom. That is, you are in fact declaring independence from a species of slavery. That is European slavery, political slavery, et cetera, et cetera. See, you are in fact establishing the revolutionary principles of liberty. The difficulty is that if you exclude, and that's I think why Jefferson included it. I think he was proud of it. But now prudence takes over. So what is the role of prudence over against the role of principle in public policy? And the answer is both are there. I mean, it's being a bit youthful, I think, to simply expect principle to prevail always over. I mean, that was us in the 60s, man. Let conscience speak to power. Yeah, until you get your head bashed in. I mean, what? I mean, that is really people reading too much Emerson and Thoreau. And then you say, hey, the cops are pigs, and when they treat you like they say, pig, well, you shouldn't do that. You're not supposed to do that. Yeah, all right. So there's a problem in terms of translating an idea into reality. Okay, let's put it that way. Now, did Jefferson actually give up anything when he dropped the idea of slavery? He claimed not. But how do you interpret silence? That becomes a huge problem in interpreting constitutionalism and the Bill of Rights. If something isn't there, does that mean it's not supposed to be there? Or if something's not there, can I simply say, well, it's so obvious that I didn't need to say it? That's tough. And I think that life would have been a heck of a lot different had Jefferson been able to leave it in there. Now, South Carolina and Georgia may not have joined, and in hindsight, you might have said, good riddance. Well, that's easy to say, but that's a question I think we should raise. That is, would have been better off? I certainly think that Judge Tawney would not have been able to render his decision with such a straight face in the Dred Scott decision, because he said if the framers had meant to condemn slavery, they would have said so. Well, if they had said so, then he wouldn't have been able to say so in such a straight face. But by that time, natural right was out, by the time Tawney came along. How about the Northwest Ordinance? Northwest Ordinance ends in a fascinating way. It ends with the statement that slavery in these territories shall not be permitted, except there shall be a fugitive slave clause. And what that tells me is that the, quote, deal between the North and the South, the existing North and the existing South, was that the South was willing and the North was willing to say slavery will continue to exist where it currently exists, but slavery will be banned from this new America, which was supposed to take place pretty much in the new millennium in 1800. And I think working that question out, the question of slavery out, is a difficult issue when it comes to talking about the Bill of Rights. I think it is possible and legitimate to not have to throw away all the other 26 rights in the Bill of Rights as a result of the slavery issue. And we will take a look next session at the Constitution is a Bill of Rights and what, if anything, was done at the Constitutional Convention to restrain the issue of slavery. And what does slavery have to do with the Bill of Rights? I'm obviously making slavery a component part of my coverage of a Bill of Rights, even though you will not find slavery per se in the list of 26. I think at that particular moment, Anthony, I'll stop and we'll see what kinds of questions emerge from the state origins and the and the Bill of Rights. Yes, Randy. Just hold on for a second while the.
Expect this one from me, sorry.
Oh, you are to be unexpected.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I want to know the first time anything is listed about women's rights in any of these state constitutions, if you saw anything like that.
The first time that women's rights are listed is with regard to property. That, for example, if, Lisa, we take a look at the Northwest Ordinance, and I'm using Northwest Ordinance as part of the state, like the new American state, if you follow what I'm getting at as well, right? If we take a look there, it's, right, Section 2, be it ordained by the authority aforesaid that the estates both of resident and non-resident proprietors in the said territory, dying intestate, shall descend to and be distributed among their children and the descendants of a deceased child in equal parts. And that seems to include women. I mean, there is no provision in there. Now, maybe to pass your standard, the word woman has to be there. Well, I don't see why. It doesn't say. I mean, that I think, all right, that's an exacting standard. But I think if you say, shall descend to and be distributed among their children, unless you don't consider a woman to be a child, excuse me, that their children and their descendants of a deceased child in equal parts. So it seems to me that is a clear statement that in the new America, that you're going to have. So I mean, if we take the three most important, what I've been emphasizing, that is property, politics, and religion, that in property relationships, that it seems to me pretty early on in the 1770s, 1780s, once you do away with primogeniture, you are in fact recalibrating the right to property. And you are now declaring that the right to property no longer resides exclusively in the eldest male son. Now, when you come to politics, the old order of monarchy was that power would reside in terms of monarchy in the oldest, the firstborn male, unless there is no firstborn male. And then and only then. By the way, the British monarchy has only changed that now in the expectation that the next child of Kate will be a woman. And so now the British are saying, look how modern we are. But you might say, look how modern you are, but you aren't Republican yet. And well, does that mean to say that to be modern you must be Republican? That's what the Americans are saying. But then there's certain kinds of republic. Right? There's the People's Republic, and then there's the Constitutional Republic, and there's this kind of republic. There's a small republic, there's a large republic. There's a commercial republic, there's an ecclesiastical. So I would go there.
Okay, so that levels the playing field about property.
Yep.
But it still doesn't mean all men are created equal.
Well, the answer is yes, it does, depending on how one interprets all men are created equal. I mean, for example, John Locke and others couldn't mean that all men are created equal means that everybody is born the same height and weight or the same beauty. You ever seen, except of course if you're the mother or the father of the child, you don't just say that. I mean, I can remember going to look in the birth area and people go, ooh, look at that baby. Oh, that baby beautiful. My son's tugging, Dad, that baby's ugly. And he's like, shh, shh. You can't say that. Why not? That's the truth. You can't say it. So it's not, so it can't be that all men are created equal means that we're born the same gender, the same color eyes. So what does it mean? Because otherwise it's just pure nonsense. So what does it mean? And I think the answer that they thought it meant comes out of, is a very good political, it means that some of us are not born as a horse to be ridden by nature, that some of us are born to be jockeys, and some of us are born to be horses. And jockeys ride horses, and there's your lot. No, some of us are not born by nature better than others. That raises the next question. So how come you rule and I don't? Hopefully you rule because I consent to your rule. Okay. Now, I would think that not until, this is my opinion, and it is right because it is mine, that I don't think that you can really start talking about women having an extensive role in politics unless you change the marriage laws. The reason being is that at the core of Republican politics, Democratic Republican politics, is consent. Okay? So what is it in the marriage vows until very, very recently that a woman said? Well, then, so I would argue that not until you really crack that one are you going to make a lot of progress. And I don't think we cracked that one much until we get into the 20th century. So does that mean then that that giving women the right to vote didn't crack it? Well, yeah, it did, but it doesn't complete it. It may lay down the roots. By the way, in the 1790s, women could vote in New Jersey, except that there was a problem, right? There's a problem with where would the new madhouse be constructed? Something like that, with Elizabethtown or Camden. And so what happened is that the men dressed as women so they could vote twice. Oh, I know what you're going to say. What you're going to say is that you should take the vote away from men. Well, since it was men who laid down the vote, they took the vote away from women. No cross-dressing in New Jersey, thank you. So, I hope that helps.
Hopefully, I'm somewhat accurate with what you said.
Oh, dear.
You mentioned a struggle between translating an idea to a reality. And I was wondering if you could give a couple of specific scenarios that perhaps have even happened or hypotheticals so that we could see how they would play out differently. Do you understand what I'm getting at?
Well, I mean, are you asking me particularly with regard to slavery, or are you asking me in life?
In life, just because of the concept of the potential, that struggle and how, each independent sort of circumstance could create a different color of how it would.
Yeah.
It would help me to see a practical example.
Okay.
To understand the concept you were trying to.
Okay, let's say fiscal cliff. We agreed that someday there's going to be a day of reckoning on $17 trillion worth of debt. We're also going to say that if you cut blindly all across, then not only will you maybe have a problem with job stimulus, but you're going to have, it's slowing down of the economy, but give me a break. You're going to have an argument now over, well, what are the basic functions of government? I mean, if you go back to the founding, the basic functions of government is security. The function of government is to make sure that people don't kill each other. Or as Jefferson said, I want to make sure that the role of government is to make sure that my neighbor doesn't pick my pocket or break my leg. So you don't want to cut police. You don't want to cut ambulance. You do want to cut maybe where you're concerned about obesity laws or such and such. So people are going to start getting in and once you increase the mix to say hundreds and hundreds of people with different ideas, then you're going to say, let's get in a room, let's talk about it. Now, you're going to say, you know, I think my priority is safety. And you're going to say, well, I think my priority is 17 trillion. So we're going to have a tough time. We all agree that we want the best for America. That's a great idea. We want that, right? We want that. Now, how do we get there? Well, because we come from different areas, we have different opinions, we're going to have to somehow negotiate. And negotiating means compromising. And compromising sometimes in this world requires choosing outcomes that you don't necessarily fully agree with. Now, the youth have a hard time dealing with that. And they rush to the word hypocrisy in no time at all. Another way of looking at it is, when are we going to stop blaming our parents? Or when are we going to stop blaming the founding fathers? There's another way of looking at it. I don't know whether that helps you, but it seems to me that I can say, for example, I have a 95-year-old mother, and I try to see her 4 times a year. But I also have a career. Am I being selfish? But I try to have both. One of these days, I'm going to have to choose one over the other. I want to do this, and I want to do that. Take the preamble to the Constitution. There are 6 purposes in the preamble. Right? The Union itself, there's domestic tranquility, common defense, general welfare, liberty, and justice. Now, perhaps one day, I won't be able to get all 6. In fact, most days, I won't be able to get all 6. So I'm going to have to make a choice. So to use that horrible word today is, how do I prioritize? All right? So you meet in your daily life. Priorities. What are our priorities? What are our goals? What is achievable within 6 months? What is achievable within a year? Do I go for, lawyers tell you, you know, you want to get around to home base. All right. Well, first of all, you had to get on first base before you get to home base. Well, all right. Well, I don't want to wait that long. Immigrant families, when they come here, a lot of them realize that they are not going to realize in their lifetime the goals and dreams which they have, but they have them for their children, right? So they have to learn what it means that they may have to sweep and they have to do that, but by goodness, my child is not going to do that. My child is going to be a teacher, teach civics education, and be worthy and poor, but worthy. So you have a God, I had to pull on that one. But I could trust you to laugh, right? But so I think we make job choices, we make marriage choices, we make family choices regularly. So I think in life that it occurs to me that there is a very, very important realm for something called prudence. And I don't mean silliness there. I mean, I simply mean, does it mean if I don't follow principle completely all the way, does that make me a hypocrite or a sellout or a sellout? Now, that was what was the language of the 1960s? I mean, the idea that you just selling out to the man, right? Right. So, yeah. But again, so I say that, I mean, so much is being taught this days as what is ethical is what Kant says, Immanuel Kant. And it's this categorical imperative. The categorical imperative is that if I see something is right, I have to do it. I have to act on it. That is, there's no independent role for action. Action is simply the application of the idea. What I'm suggesting is that prudence involves, all right, here comes the naughty word, a calculation. Right? A calculation, a weighing and a measuring, a cost and a benefit involved in how far do I go now. I might say that it's absolutely terrific that I should have I should use drones in Afghanistan. No, nay, I should use drones in Southern California to police such and such. Now, I may say, now, you know what, that might be one of the nice things to do, but, you know, it raises a question about whether or not I really want to do drones. Does that cause doctors performing abortions or not performing abortions? I hope I've given you enough examples. And I'm confident the way you're looking at me, you've got several of your own.
All right, so let's wrap up session 2 with that. Thank you very much, and we'll come back at about 11:10 for our third session.
Fine, sounds good.